On today's show, what's the point of short-term missions? Is it to produce long-term missionaries?
I don't think long-term mission should be the goal of short-term mission. I think mission should be the goal of short-term mission and of long-term mission, that we really are wanting to do something that is going to be pleasing, honoring to God. And I think if we do that, there can be some great benefits.
Chip Lamca explains how short-term missions needs to change on today's show. But first, an important message. If you're a regular listener to this show, we wanted to say thank you. Without the Lord's help and without you, we wouldn't still be doing this. But we also want you to know that this show wouldn't exist if it weren't for ABWE International and ABWE missionaries like Justin, who's a missionary in a Muslim country in Asia. So let me tell you about him. One day, he was wandering a crowded street doing street evangelism. He'd been doing it every morning for 9 months with no results. He was discouraged. He sat down at an outdoor coffee shop. Local men crowded the table, fraternizing before the start of the workday. Justin tried to start a spiritual conversation with the Muslim man seated next to him, and the man, disinterested, walked off. But before Justin could even process the rejection, he heard a voice speaking to him in broken English. The voice said, "You said sins forgiven. How?" It was another Muslim man who had been sitting next to him, who was listening silently the whole time. Justin, knowing the dangers of doing evangelism openly in this country, started to whisper to him about Jesus. They crept closer and closer until they were inches apart. They were looking around for danger the whole time. Justin whispered the gospel into this man's ear, and the man grabbed him by the shoulders, pushed him back, and said, "Many of us want to know this message, but we're not allowed to ask." That's what life is like in a country where evangelism is illegal, and more than 130 ABWE workers like Justin are serving in places like this. Every gift to ABWE's Global Gospel Fund goes to critical staffing, support, training, and services to advance the gospel to the lost and unreached through faithful workers like Justin. So learn more and become a partner with ABWE at abwe.org/partner. That's abwe.org/partner. Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Communications, joined in the flesh by Scott Dunford, West Coast, what's your title?
Advancement Coordinator.
Advancement Coordinator.
Yes.
And
important regular thing doer, lead pastor, Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. We can have a much more natural back and forth today now that we're not being, mediated by 3,000 miles of fiber optic cable or whatever. Yes, it feels good. Other than the cicadas deafening and the incredible humidity, I'm just very used to no humidity in California.
It's horrible. The cicadas will they'll dive bomb you. They're kamikaze cicadas, and you have to scream in the parking lot to hear yourself think. I mean, that's how loud they are right now. It
is not good.
It's strange. It's the new murder hornets.
I just wanted to say, as we were listening again to the story of Justin, I was telling you, Alex, I had a friend that I haven't talked to in a couple of years say, "Hey, every time I listen to your show and I'm a regular listener and I hear that story, I tear up." And that I just thought that should encourage you, since you're the one telling the story, even though I know you weren't the guy in the story.
No, well, I'm not the guy in the story.
That's a very cool, very, very impacting thing that I know is hopefully encouraging to our listeners, that as they're sharing, you never know how God's going to use that.
That's what keeps me doing my job here, is knowing that we're serving real missionaries like Justin who are doing really hard things for Jesus. So, and those things that they do have changed. So this last year plus, with the pandemic, with everything politically, I mean, so much has changed, but especially with travel, with the pandemic, it's really changed how short-term missions operates. We're trying to figure that out as well. Oh, thank you. You liked that segue? I'm going to ride that segue hard. Let's keep going on it. So this is our second attempt in interviewing Dr. Chip Lamca, who you'll introduce in a second here, Scott. And technology, again, it's always good when you can do things face-to-face instead of the technology getting in the way. But we're excited to talk about the changing face of short-term missions. And why don't you introduce our guest to us?
Yeah, so we're having a friend that's a return guest to Alex and I, but not a return guest to anyone else. And we had some huge technical difficulties, this is probably the first time we've ever had to completely record
record an episode.
Yeah, like straight up lost the whole track.
Yes.
It's a first time in almost 4 years of doing this. It just wasn't meant to be.
And we've done, so Chip, this should make you feel bad because we've done interviews all over the world, including like very remote places, and have never had this issue. And here you are in Phoenix. We couldn't get it to work.
It is a dry internet out here. So.
Yeah, the dry internet. Yes, the heat even affects that dry internet. So Chip and his wife for missionaries.
That dry humor too.
Chip and his wife were missionaries for over 8 years in Peru and other places in South America. Before he transitioned to Phoenix, where he serves as instructor of Christian worldview and missions at Grand Canyon University. I almost said University of Phoenix, which would be a terrible faux pas. And Chip and I met sitting by each other in missiology classes at Midwestern. We were working on our doctorates together, and had an affinity as we were talking about the work of Christ around the world and the role of the church in those things.
Did you guys make spitballs together?
He was a better student than I was, obviously, but he's done a lot of research, particularly not just in training up young people and serving, but did his doctoral research on short-term missions, particularly. So, Chip, we're so glad to have you back on our show. First time for our listeners, though. And can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how God led you into missions in the first place?
Wow. Okay. Well, I don't get tired of talking about me, and I'm excited how God called me into missions, and so God called me into missions really as He called me to Himself. I was living in central Pennsylvania, and my dad had started to go to church. He had become a Christian. I didn't really know what that meant, but I just knew that we were in church a lot more often than we had been. And a neighbor invited me to a thing called a 5-day club. And he said, we're going to have cookies and we're going to have juice and we're going to have stories and songs. I was like, you had me at cookies. When is it? So I went to this 5-day club, and I heard the gospel really in a narrative form. But the thing that kept me going back every day was hearing the story of John Patton and his missionary life. And there was this cliffhanger every day. And, so it'd be like, and back behind the dunes that nobody could see were these, come back tomorrow. And I was like, yeah.
Right.
So at the end of the week, I really, as a 7-year-old, understood not just that God loved me, but that God loved me despite the fact that I wasn't real lovable. And I can remember, that 5-day club ended on Friday. I was miserable Friday. I was miserable Saturday. I went to church on Sunday morning, and the teacher welcomed us. And I raised my hand. I said, I would like to ask Jesus to come into my heart. And she said, oh, honey, that's wonderful. Let's do that after class, and we can talk. And I said, well, no, I need to do that now. And she said, well, so what we're going to do is we're going to have our story time, and we're going to maybe do a craft. And I said, okay, so if a rock rolls off the mountain across the road and it rolls down and it crushes us and I die, I'm supposed to say, God, I'm sorry, but Mrs. Albright made me wait until after. So she said, well, let's go talk out in the hall now. I said, hey, that's a great idea.
You're a formidable kid.
I was a formidable kid. But I knew that I was lost, and I knew that I needed Jesus. And I really feel like God was getting my attention through that missionary story. And God continued to bring missionaries into my life. They were my heroes. And, it just really helped me to understand, even though I didn't act on my missionary call until a little bit later, I knew that God was calling me all that time.
So I'm curious, you served in Peru for 8 years. What's the weird?
Peru and Ecuador. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the weirdest thing you ate when you were in Latin America? Yeah, I'm genuinely curious.
I think I probably have to go with guinea pig.
Oh, made me sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I won't bore the listeners, but I just killed a number of tadpoles that my kids were basically treating as pets. So I'm kind of sore on the topic of children's pets right now. So anyway, moving past that, let me move past that a little bit. In your time on the field for 8 years, I don't know about you, but a lot of the long-term missionaries that I've spoken to, they respect short-term missions, but obviously they hold that idea at arm's length because it's limited in its impact that it can have. The real work happens long-term.
So a lot of work for long-term missionaries.
Well, yeah, right. It's a burden for them. You're basically, you have to open up your home. You have to do all these sorts of things to allow them to have what often amounts to a poverty tourism experience. So was that your perspective, and has that shifted? And if so, how?
Yeah, it was sort of a mixed bag. There were short-term teams that you were like, man, can you come back next week? Because we got so much done and we saw God work in great ways. There were other teams that you said, can you come back next year? I think that you've got some, you could do some more research and really get ready. And there were other groups that we said, could you go somewhere else? And because they weren't willing to learn, or they weren't willing to adapt to what we saw long term. So with that kind of mixed bag, I found myself living in Phoenix, Arizona, working on a university campus with students who wanted to be part of mission but didn't quite know how. And so there became this transition where I said, well, I know what, as a long-term missionary, I wanted to see in short-term mission teams. Maybe I can help that to happen with the students that I take from Grand Canyon. And we worked at that. We've been doing this, I think, for 12 years with short-term teams in conjunction with being a professor here at Grand Canyon. And I think, we've done some things that were helpful. But I kept learning and I kept reading before I was in the doctoral program. When I started into the doctoral program, someone gave me some great advice. And that was, if you're going to pick a topic for your dissertation, pick something that you can really live with for a long time, because you're going to eat it, sleep it, drink it for 4 or 5 or 6 years. And so, make sure it's something worthwhile. So I thought, well, God has me working with short term. And so I'm going to try to get as good at it as I can, learn as much about it as I can, because particularly in a doctor of ministry, you're not reinventing the wheel. You're just trying to make the tires better. You're trying to make sure that they run smoother, they have better grip, they're doing what needs to be done in a biblical way. And so that's where I set my mind to. And I've really been surprised that I saw short-term mission as probably something that needed to happen. I know you gentlemen are aware there are lots of reasons that people give for short-term. It's to develop long-term missionaries. It is helpful for people in the United States and Canada to be able to see what goes into their mission dollars, what their long-term missionaries are doing. It can create vision for the future. I think there's more to it. I think that what it can be, what it should be, is mission. And the short term becomes a matter of timing. If we can get back to thinking of it as mission, I think there's great possibilities for that.
I'm really curious. I know that in my research for my degree, I've been working and finding some interesting things. Was there anything unique that you found in your research? I know it's a practical degree, but you still do a lot of research, that when you found it, you were like, wow, that actually surprised me.
I think I had read Roland Allen, Missionary Methods, St. Paul's or Ours. And even though that book is over 100 years old,
still should be read. Yes.
It is fresh, man. It really is. Is particularly things that he says that now apply to short-term mission. Like he talks about the tendency of missionaries to China in the late 1800s who carried everything with them, right? They would bring all of their stuff that they needed from, in his case, England, to China. And they had all this material false need. They had to have that. Well, short-term missionaries, we tend to carry a lot of baggage. And I mean that in terms of, putting it on the plane, putting it in the taxi. we will usually carry with us more than the people we're going to work with own.
Some of the studies done on short-term missions, and I know you're aware of them. We've talked about them. We've probably even talked about them on the show before. We're getting to enough episodes that we forget sometimes the things we've already
Coming
said.
up on 200.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Are you going to count me twice since I did this last week?
That's a good idea.
We'll engage in some pragmatic methodologies in the way that we count.
we're taking notes on what we're seeing out there. But some of the studies that have been done on short-term missions have shown that there's, one of the big reasons that people give for short-term missions is like that's the way you get long-term missionaries, and then the studies come back to basically show there's almost no correlation between the short-term directly impacting long-term missions. You'd think, hey, more short-termers go, so more long-term people go, and that just doesn't correlate. So what do you make of that? And should long-term missions pipelines be the goal of short-term missions, or should there be another way of thinking about short-term missions if those statistics are actually true?
Yeah, I don't think it should. I don't think long-term mission should be the goal of short-term mission. I think mission should be the goal of short-term mission and of long-term mission. That we really are wanting to do something that is going to be pleasing, honoring to God. And I think if we do that, there can be some great benefits that come out of it. We all have anecdotes, right, of people having been on a short-term mission trip. In my case, I was on 2 different mission trips, one to Mexico, one to El Salvador. The one to Mexico was glorious. God moved in great ways. The one to El Salvador, we barely got out alive, and we were just so glad to be on an airplane. But it confirmed that God had called me to mission. My wife went to Peru as a long-term missionary, never having been on a mission trip, and that was kind of a rarity. But I would say this, as much as I think it's helpful for students to learn something about mission through a short-term mission, it really isn't going to give you a good picture of missionary life. The reason for that is the time frame. If you're gone for 14 days even, which is pretty much the standard mission trip, especially from North America, you're on a honeymoon. Everything is lovely. Everything is beautiful. Alex, the guinea pig is the most delicious thing I've ever had in my life. I can't believe I've never had this before. And could I just wash that down with whatever that yellow soft drink that smells like bananas and tastes like bubble gum? That's just the best thing ever. That's a honeymoon. You haven't been there long enough to experience some of the things that are frustrating. My son, who's a long-term missionary, said to me the other day, he said, "Dad, I got to go. I've got 3 bills to pay. This is going to take all day." And I knew exactly what he meant. He's a long-term missionary in Quito, and he's got to go 3 different places and stand in long lines and be 6 feet apart and, have the right change. So the short-term mission trip really isn't going to give you the best picture of what's involved. I don't think anyone can keep the pace of a short-term mission trip. So you couldn't live at that fevered pitch, I don't think, for very long. But that's one of the things that makes a short-term mission a great thing. It's because it's mission, but it's focused. It's for a short amount of time. There's a lot of energy expended. But really, of our mission force, and I don't mean ABWEs, but of the evangelical American-based mission force, 25% of our missionaries are the sum total of all of these short-term workers. That's an awful big part of the force. And so my thought on it is, if I have 4 missionaries, and one of them is that short-term missionary, it's the sum total of all those missionaries who come, I want to make sure that 25% of my workforce is as ready to hit the ground running as is possible.
Right.
It's not the same as having a full-timer.
And maybe, taking the time to explain to those that are in that 25% that make up the short-term missionaries that they're not doing the same work that a long-term missionary is. I mean, that's part of the problem, right? Is that we conflate like my 2-week trip to that's what missions is. And therefore,
Sure.
I'm going to go and hang out at the beach and spend half my time looking at sites and the other half of the time handing out tracts at the beach and doing some fun things. And that's what all missionaries do. So maybe explaining
I'm sure
the
we
difference.
know, and I have friends. I have people. I was just with them a couple of weeks ago. People that are very jaded about missions because they know missionaries who are doing that, as well. So just to make sure I understand what you're saying, Chip. So you're saying they're all a means to an end. The end is mission. The end is not recruitment of more long-term missionaries. So in other words, you would say short-term missions is not just an experiential thing for the goer. It's a legitimate tool in the arsenal of doing the Great Commission. Just like you would look in the New Testament, and granted, like there's a lot of different things going on there historically and culturally, but like a lot of what Paul did, a lot of what the disciples did would have been short term by today's standards. You would say this is right, short in terms of duration. And you would say, hey, let's reframe it that way instead of making it a mechanism in some other goal.
Absolutely.
And maybe some work could be done by guys like Chip. I'm writing your second dissertation for you.
Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm not writing it, but
you ought to write your own. Is what you?
Yeah, Alex, like just finish your own stupid dissertation. You and my wife both, and my first reader.
Well, get to him.
Yeah, should have done it in short term, but maybe some of it is just thinking through like what are the tasks on the field that the short termers should be doing and can do in 2 or 3
try
weeks. To clarify that so we're not just wasting time.
Painting a roof, I would say.
Well, I mean, we've shared this story before, but like I know on the short term, one of the trips I took was a very good trip. The majority of what we did was very effective in many ways. But I know we painted a wall that every single trip that comes paints that wall because that's a good, busy thing for the American people to do because they need stuff to do. And
we want to feel useful.
I didn't know that until I came back, full time later. And they're like, yeah, that wall gets painted all the time.
Maybe it wears down really quick.
Where we were, the air's dirty and needs to get painted all the time. But anyway, so
that wall is famous all over the world, really. There is that. So
there is a wall.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got some more questions, and you've talked about this thing called reverse short-term missions. What is that? And you've also helped to create a minor for short-term missions at the school where you are. Curious why, honestly. Let's talk about that. More we're going to dive into with Chip Lamca in just a minute. Hey listeners, want to meet us? Well, we'd love to meet you. And if you're hungering for a deep, no-fluff missions conference, keep listening. The Radius Missiology Conference is happening June 23rd and 24th at Bethlehem Baptist Church in Minneapolis. The theme this year, Acts, the gospel proclaimed through the church. Hear from John Piper, Mark Dever, Brooks Buser, Chad Vegas, and more. Now, Scott and myself will be there in person, live, recording, interviewing speakers, and enjoying the fellowship. If you're like us, it's probably been a while since you've been to a conference, so get out of the house and come. And enter our drawing to attend for free. That's right, free. Simply go to missionspodcast.com/RMC for details. And we'll see you there this June at the Radius Missiology Conference.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunford, and I'd like to share with you about a new nonprofit ministry established to help churches, Christian schools, and other ministries protect children and prevent abuse. Rich Hamar from Church Law and Tax states that the number one reason that drives churches to court is child sexual abuse. I can't think of anything more devastating to these lives, their families, and our witness before a watching world than sexual abuse that takes place in ministry. The traumatic impact often leaves the vulnerable not wanting anything to do with God or His people. Our efforts toward evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation are not only neutralized, but shattered. Evangelical Counsel for Abuse Prevention was formed to help ministry leaders understand the complexities of child protection and abuse prevention. They are establishing standards and an accreditation program that will help verify that appropriate measures are in place at your church or ministry. Learn more about them. Find a helpful and free assessment tool to help you see how you measure up in this area. Go to abuseprevention.org and click on the link for this resource assessment. Evangelical Counsel for Abuse Prevention.
We're back talking with Dr. Chip Lamca of Grand Canyon University, veteran missionary who served in parts in Latin America. So something we teased a little bit before the break, Chip, you've done some thinking about the concept of reverse short-term missions. What is that?
Boy, I wish I knew. Thank you for bringing that up. Reverse short-term mission is this. We do a great job of getting mobilized and leading teams to different places. My part of the world is Latin America. But there are pastors and there are leaders in all parts of the world right now who are locked down. But they've learned this thing called Zoom. They have learned to be able to communicate on WhatsApp or Zoom or Facebook and to keep in touch with their congregations. I think that one of the things that we can do to make mission better is to educate our church members. And so by reversing the mission, the short-term mission team, we can invite the pastor from the church in Quito or the church in Lima to come to our congregation on a Sunday morning. We've gotten used to Zoom. We may not love it all the time, but we know that it's been helpful for us. I don't think it's that strange to then invite people from other congregations to come and speak to our church. I know that I have worked with short-term practitioners, short-term members who've said, I just wish you could know the pastor we worked with in Trujillo, Peru. He was so amazing and so gifted. Well, why can't our church meet him? Why can't we invite them in? My wife and I are headed to Quito in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be there for a good part of the summer. I hope that we don't put my home address up with the podcast information. But
I generally don't do that with our guests unless they rub me the wrong way.
Now we want to.
Not our last guest, especially.
Yes.
So, what we'll be doing there is working with pastors with whom we have long-term connection because we were long-term missionaries there. But we are going to be trying to help them connect. And one of the things I'm doing to be purposeful about this and to try it out is I'm inviting a pastor that I've worked with for many years in Lima to Zoom in. He's a gifted musician. He's going to put on a closed circuit concert for these pastors and wives and let them hear music they've never heard. It's all original music, a way for him to minister to them from Lima to Quito. We're also doing some work with the group that normally would have gone to Peru last year from Grand Canyon is going to be doing a virtual mission trip to Peru. And there's going to be some back and forth there as well and trying to get people connected from another part of the world to the United States.
I love that because I'm one of those guys that is kind of skeptical about what we can actually do through Zoom, like especially church stuff. Like there's such a value of gathering.
Yeah.
But being able to use the technology and the things we've learned, and now the fact that churches that weren't really that technologically savvy probably are now, to be able to use that to connect national leaders with churches here. Like, I think that's a great idea and something that I think could be a really legitimate and helpful use of the technology.
Yeah.
So talking about Grand Canyon for a second, we're going to give you a chance to really tell us all the things that are great about Grand Canyon. People on the West Coast are pretty familiar with Grand Canyon, but I realize that on the East Coast, you do see the commercials on TV. But beyond that, there's a lot that people don't know about why Phoenix would be a great place to study for ministry. And I want to give you a chance to talk about that. But tell us a little bit about this minor you've created. Like, I can imagine some people are going like, why in the world do we need a minor in short-term missions?
Right. What did you minor in college, Scott?
Me?
Yeah.
Biblical languages.
Nerd.
Who you?
Government.
Yeah. Well, see, you look at you, Alex.
Yeah. Now I'm governing.
Now you talk about government. So short-term missions, like especially at a school like Grand Canyon, when you've got all these, majors that it's not just a Bible college, it's a very large Christian liberal arts university. So why did you do this, and what are you hoping to accomplish through it?
Yeah. Grand Canyon, I'm always surprised when people, say, oh, Grand Canyon, I know Grand Canyon, because we do have a big online presence. But when I started here 13 years ago, we had 900 students. And
that's crazy.
And now we have, I don't want to give official GCU figures, but I think there might be about 20,000 people on this campus come fall. Of course, I attribute that all to anyhow, I'll just stop there.
That's called correlation, not causation.
Exactly.
I probably made that joke last recording.
So, I've seen this place grow, but we are an urban campus. I can walk off this campus and immediately within 2 blocks, we could engage in a conversation in Spanish and in Portuguese and in Arabic and Cambodian dialects and Chinese dialects. The world is all around us. So this is a place where when you leave the campus, you really are among the nations. We have one of the highest refugee populations, especially from Southern Asia. Just tremendous populations in this area. I know that one of the elementary schools within a half mile of the campus has dozens of languages that are spoken. So Grand Canyon is a great place to have a lab. So why a short-term mission minor? We want mission to be better. We want mission not to be focused on short-term, but on mission. But we also know that we have a lot of students who aren't going to be able to do a full mission major or mission minor, but they're pre-med students and they're nursing students, they're education or engineering students. And this is an opportunity for them to get a little bit more Bible than they would have, a little bit more Christian living, and certainly more mission preparation. My dissertation became the model for what we're doing here with labs. So we have 4 one-hour labs in short-term mission. We have a short-term mission experience where they can apply those.
Not written down.
And we have great hopes that it's going to do a lot for mission that will just happen to be done in a short-term kind of format.
Well, I love that because I do think that you have a lot of kids that are like, hey, I want to go into missions, and they want to go do a missions major, and their parents are like, what if you need a backup plan if I'm dropping $30,000 or whatever. I don't know what Grand Canyon costs, but it's probably similar to that. If I'm dropping $30,000, I want to make sure that you've got can also get a job.
It's much less than that, Scott. I'm just saying.
Less.
Hey, that's a great commercial. Almost like we set that up, which we didn't, but we could have if we were smarter. But you know what I mean? Like, so that makes sense to me that you can say, okay, hey, here's what you can do. You can go ahead and get your pre-med degree, which could also be useful in the field, but also, or your engineering degree, but also get some of this equipping and training that will really help you in the future.
Yeah. I just want to make this practical, though. So we're trying to rethink short-term missions, and you've given us a lot of different unique insights. And I think reframing it as a valid method of doing real ministry, of accomplishing a mission, of reaching a people group, doing whatever you need to do. I think you've been helpful for us in that way. So let's make it practical. What next steps would you give somebody? Let's say maybe I'm a pastor listening and I'm wondering, all right, do I need to start doing an annual missions trip from my church? And we're coming out of COVID now. Do we need to put that on the calendar? Maybe visit some of the missionaries that we support. What would be something practical that you would encourage us to pursue?
Great question. You should do this for a living, Alex. This is it's really helpful.
I'm thinking about it.
Good. So I think one of the first things to do is not rush back to do everything that you were doing before. That is
before COVID. Yeah.
I think that this has given us an opportunity to take a breath, to really evaluate. Yeah. And I would start with saying, let's not rush back in and do everything that we had just always done. But let's really ask ourselves about our church being on mission. Let's ask ourselves what we can do, how we can be involved, what stage would we enter at. So, for example, if a church has done the same wall painting or even the same evangelistic sewing, sometimes we become so enamored with a people and a place that we want to go back to relive that experience. But we might need to be asking, what can we do now that we have pre-evangelized or evangelized? What do we need to do to help to strengthen that local church? How can we be involved in maybe helping them to motivate and to be moving on to the next village or the next people group or the next country so that they're a more integral part of the Great Commission?
Chip, how can people hear more from you? How can they connect and interact with you on some of the things that you've shared here today and take a next step?
Well, I think that there are a number of terrific books on mission, and I would start there.
Such as? I would love to hear your recommendations.
Let the Nations Be Glad. That's the first one that comes to mind. Piper does a great job of making me feel very, very uncomfortable. And I love people who make me feel uncomfortable. Paradigms in Conflict by David Hesselgrave. I think that was his last book, was the second edition of that. Wow. I have this history with David Hesselgrave of having read his books and then having questions about them. And back when I was in seminary and working my MDiv, I actually read one of his books. It was Communicating Christ Cross-Culturally. And I had something that I dog-eared. And I read the back of the book, read where he was teaching, and I called TEDS and asked to speak with him. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he just retired." And I said, "Do you have his home number?" And this was long before privacy laws, and they gave me his home number. and I called, and we had this conversation about what he had written in his book. And he was just so gracious to a theological tadpole at the time. And but he's one of these guys that makes me think. So in Paradigms in Conflict, he goes back and forth on a lot of different subjects, including short-term mission. And he was not a great fan. And but I love that kind of give and take. The other book I would suggest, and this would be my third on the top three, and that's Roland Allen. And to just look at those insights, it was really interesting. He wrote that in 1912, and he told his son, "This is a couple generations away from being relevant or being accepted." And about 1960, Paul Winter started to talk about Roland Allen's work, and it really, there are some things that are dated, as he talks about his experience really as a missionary in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But I find a lot of those speak to me as someone who works in short-term mission.
We'll include links to all of those in the show notes. Chip, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, they can, I guess, get me through the website at Grand Canyon University. I also work with a very small short-term focused ministry called Vine and Branches Global Ministries, and that's VABGM.com.
VABGM.com.
Yes.
All right, Chip. Well, thank you for your time, and always good to connect with you. Grateful for the work that you're doing at Grand Canyon. If this has been a helpful thing to you today, go ahead and share this episode with a friend. Before you leave, make sure you leave a positive rating, a 5-star review positive review and a 5-star rating in your plod. I'll re-record this.
No, keep us all.
Oh, okay, I'm going to keep. Okay, I'll keep it all. All right. Thank you for listening. Please share it with a friend. And, okay, bye.
Alex out.
Peace. That just happened.
Alex, that was hilarious. Why would you cut the funny parts out?
The
podcast.
Don't tempt me. I might keep it.